My sister lied that I'd quit medical school and my parents cut me off. Years later, she landed in the ER where I walked in as her attending physician. The night my sister destroyed my life, I was elbow deep in a cadaver, formaldehyde sharp in my sinuses, 4 hours of sleep in my body. The particular tunnel vision exhaustion of second-year medical school, where the world beyond the anatomy lab has stopped feeling real and the only thing that exists is the structure in front of you and whether you can name it. My phone buzzed on the shelf above my station. I almost ignored it. We were midway through a thoracic dissection, and Dr. Parrish had a policy about phones that was enforced with the particular enthusiasm of a man who had survived his own training without them. But the screen said Dad, which meant something had happened because my father did not text. He called. He had called me every Sunday at 7 p.m. for as long as I could remember, and he texted only when calling felt like too much, which meant only when something was wrong. Your mother and I need space. Until you're ready to be honest, please don't contact us. I read it twice. The formaldehyde smell became suddenly overwhelming. I called him. Straight to voicemail. Called my mother. Voicemail. Called my younger brother Kevin, who was 17 and had nothing to do with any adult conflict and should not have been unreachable at 11 p.m. Blocked. All three of them. Simultaneously. Which meant it had been coordinated. Which meant someone had arranged it. Which meant I already knew. In the cold clinical part of my brain that processes facts before feelings catch up. What had probably happened. I just didn't know how bad it was yet. I found out at 3 a.m. as sitting on the linoleum floor of the hospital's basement corridor with my back against a supply closet, piecing it together from the 3 texts I'd received from my cousin Jenny before she went quiet too. My sister Natalie had gone to my parents' house that afternoon. She'd been crying, Jenny said, sobbing uncontrollably. She looked completely devastated, and she had told them that I had failed out of medical school, that I had been lying to them for a year, that I was drowning in debt and hiding it, that I had told her in a conversation she described in detail that I would hurt myself before I let them find out the truth. She had brought documentation, fake bank statements showing a spiraling balance, fabricated text screenshots that looked like me having a breakdown, a letter she had apparently composed herself, printed on what looked like official school letterhead, notifying a student of academic dismissal. My parents had not called the school. They had not called me. They had believed every word because Natalie had cried the right way and said the right things and had arrived with papers in hand, and because I understood this later fully, after years of therapy that helped me name it. They had always, on some deep and unexamined level, expected me to fail. Not because they were cruel. Because I was the one who had reached for something outside the family's frame of reference, and reaching that far made people nervous, and nervous people are suggestible. Natalie had known exactly which nerve to press. I emailed my transcripts at 4 a.m., my GPA 387, a commendation letter from Dr. James Whitfield, Chief of Surgery, praising my performance in his department. My enrollment verification, current as of that week. My mother's response arrived at 6:15 while I was scrubbing for morning rounds. Natalie warned us you'd forge documents if we confronted you. Please get help. We love you. She had vaccinated them against the truth before I could open my mouth. She had thought of everything. I need to tell you who Natalie is before I tell you what happened next, because understanding what she did requires understanding what she is, and I have spent a long time learning to describe that clearly without letting the description become the story. Natalie Chen is 4 years younger than me. She is beautiful in the particular way that makes people assume good things about her. Symmetrical, well-maintained, the kind of face that photographs well and reads as sincere. She is also the most strategically intelligent person I have ever met, which I say without the smallest trace of admiration, because intelligence deployed without conscience is not a thing to admire. We grew up in a household with limited resources and unlimited expectation. Immigrant parents, my father an engineer, my mother a pharmacist, both of them operating on the conviction that their children's success was the return on everything they had sacrificed. The expectation distributed unequally. I was the older daughter, the one who was supposed to lead. Natalie was the younger one, the one who was supposed to follow. What Natalie had decided, somewhere in her adolescence, was that she did not want to follow. She wanted the resources the family had designated for my education, my future, my path. Not because she needed them, she is smart enough to have earned her own way, but because she wanted them, and wanting was enough. The signs had been there for years. Recommendations I'd written for her jobs that she'd used and then reported, falsely, that I had submitted late. A scholarship application I was helping her with that she'd submitted under a version of my name, then claimed I'd sent it by accident when the school flagged it. Small detonations, each one deniable, none of them ever landing quite hard enough to name clearly. I should have named it earlier. The medical school gambit was the one that finally landed hard enough. The financial support stopped the same week as the blocking. I want to be precise about what that meant, because the word support makes it sound soft. What it actually meant was rent, food, health insurance, the $400 monthly contribution toward the loan payments I was already carrying, gone in a week. During my second year of medical school, with boards 3 months away and a clinical rotation schedule that left approximately 6 waking hours per day not accounted for by the hospital, I moved out of my apartment on a Tuesday. I slept in my 2009 Honda Civic for 11 days in October before I found a room in a house with 4 other students that cost $380 a month and smelled permanently of mildew. The 11 days in the Civic, I timed my crying. 14 minutes, no more, because I had rounds at 6 a.m., and puffy eyes invited questions I could not answer and had no energy to deflect. I ate cafeteria food that the staff were about to discard. I sold plasma twice a week. The plasma center opened at 7:00 a.m., and I could be in and out in 45 minutes before morning rounds, $25 each visit. I applied for every emergency grant and hardship fund the school offered, under the guidance of my student services advisor, Barbara Tran, who processed my paperwork with the efficient compassion of someone who had seen this before and was angry on my behalf in a way she couldn't quite say directly. I told no one what was happening, not my attending physicians, not my study group, not Dr. Parrish, who I am fairly certain noticed something was wrong and chose to address it by being slightly less cutting than usual during my evaluations, which was his version of kindness. I told my therapist, Dr. Helen Zhao, who I paid for on a sliding scale at a community mental health clinic, $15 per session, because not telling her would have made the sessions useless. She was 46 years old and had been practicing for 18 years, and she was the first person I said the full version of it out loud to. My sister fabricated a mental health crisis to convince my parents I had failed out of school, so they would cut off my support, and I would have to drop out, and she could have whatever she had decided she wanted. Dr. Zhao looked at me for a long moment. "Miranda," she said, "what you're describing is not a family conflict. What you're describing is a targeted campaign." I wrote that down. I kept going. Boards were in March. I had been living on 4 to 5 hours of sleep for 5 months. I had sold my laptop and was using library computers for study materials. I had a single pair of professional shoes with a developing crack in the left sole that I had reinforced with electrical tape, which held through most of clinical rotations and gave out completely during a 7-hour surgery I scrubbed in on in February. I finished the surgery in shoes held together with tape and gauze from the supply closet, and no one noticed, or if they did not say so. I scored in the 94th percentile on my USMLE Step 1. I want to say that plainly, without decoration, because the number is the point. Not because scores define competence, I know better, but because I had been told by the people who were supposed to know me best that I was failing, that I was drowning, that I was a fraud performing a life I couldn't sustain. And the number is the record that says no. The number is the thing Natalie could not fabricate, and my parents could not be persuaded to dismiss. 94th percentile. I cried in the car after I got the results. Not from relief exactly, from something more complex, the particular grief of being vindicated by something that should never have needed to vindicate you, because the people who loved you should have believed you first. 14 minutes. Then I stopped. I had a rotation at 6 a.m. I graduated 3 years later. The ceremony was at noon on a Thursday in May. I had 1 ticket. Student Affairs provided 1 per graduate, and no one to give it to. My husband James, who I had met during my residency at a coffee shop at 6 a.m., when we were both in the specific trance of people who have been awake for 22 hours, came anyway. Stood in the standing room at the back. Took a photo on his phone when they called my name. I walked across the stage. I shook the dean's hand. Dr. Richard Calloway, who had been dean of the medical school for 9 years, gave me the particular look that administrators give graduates whose family section is conspicuously empty, brief, searching, an attempt to locate the people who should be there, and then looked away. I smiled for the official photographer. I have the photo. I look composed and clear-eyed and entirely alone, and I look like someone who has made peace with that, which is because I had. James took me to dinner that night at a place we could barely afford. He ordered champagne. He looked at me across the table and said, "You did something remarkable. Not I'm proud of you," which would have been about his feeling. "You did something remarkable," which was about the fact. I have loved him for many reasons, but that sentence is near the top of the list. We married 2 years into my residency. Small ceremony. His family, my friend Claire from medical school, Barbara Tran, who had processed my hardship applications, and cried a little during the vows. No one from my family. I had stopped expecting them. 6 years passed. I became an ER attending physician at Presbyterian Memorial Hospital, a level 1 trauma center. I was 34 years old. I had an apartment with a real kitchen and a bed that didn't fold out from a wall, and a husband who made coffee before I woke up on early shift mornings and left it in a thermos on the counter. I had colleagues I respected. I had patients who were sometimes grateful and sometimes terrifying, and occasionally both simultaneously. I had built something so solid that Natalie's architecture of lies couldn't reach it. This is not a story about forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. I had not forgiven my parents. I had not forgiven Natalie. I had, with Dr. Zhao's careful guidance over 4 years of sessions, arrived at something more sustainable than forgiveness, a complete separation. The kind where you stop waiting for an apology because you have finally understood that the apology, even if it came, could not return what was taken. I was fine. I was genuinely, structurally fine. And then my phone rang at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answer unknown numbers reflexively. Occupational habit, emergency calls come from unfamiliar lines. And the voice on the other end was my mother's, not the voice I remembered. Something shredded out of it. Barely human. Miranda. A pause in which I could hear her trying to find the next words. "It's Natalie. Her heart. They said she might not survive the night. I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a doctor." "What were the exact symptoms?" I said, already reaching for my coat with my free hand. I drove to Presbyterian Memorial running differential diagnoses: acute mitral regurgitation, ruptured chordae tendineae, aortic dissection presenting atypically. I reduced my family to mechanics, failing pumps, electrical disturbances, fleshy cystic systems in Cascade because it was the only way I could make myself walk through those doors, and I knew it, and I did it deliberately, the way you use the tools available to you. I badged through the emergency entrance at 12:09 a.m. and found out from the charge nurse, Diane Park, 11 years in emergency nursing, the kind of professional competence that makes a trauma bay feel controlled even when it isn't, that Natalie was in trauma room 3 with Dr. Ben Kaufman, my colleague, who was currently managing what appeared to be a spontaneous chordal rupture causing acute mitral regurgitation. Natalie was 30 years old. She had no prior cardiac history. She had presented 3 hours ago via EMS, was on a ventilator, and was deteriorating. I pushed through the trauma room door. The monitors were screaming. Natalie was gray-blue and drowning in her own fluid. The ventilator doing the breathing her body had stopped being able to manage on its own. The chest films were up on the board. I could see the pulmonary edema. I could see the cardiomegaly. I could see, in the particular language of medical imaging that had become my primary language over 10 years, exactly how bad this was. She looked small. I don't know what I expected. I hadn't seen her in 6 years. In my memory, she was 24, still wearing the residue of the girl I had grown up with, the sister I had helped with homework, whose hair I had braided, who had borrowed my sweaters and returned them smelling like her perfume. The person in the trauma bay bore a superficial resemblance to that girl and was otherwise a stranger, which is what 6 years without contact produces. In the corner of the room, standing against the wall as though they had been placed there and hadn't moved since, were my parents. My father's hair had gone completely white. He had been 58 the last time I saw him, and he looked 70 now, the specific accelerated aging of sustained grief. My mother was gripping his arm with both hands, fingers whitening, watching the monitors with the expression of a person who has run out of things to bargain with. Then she heard the door. She turned, and I watched it happen. The whole sequence in slow motion, across the length of a trauma bay. Recognition, then confusion, then the gaze dropping from my face to my white coat, traveling to the stethoscope around my neck, arriving at my badge. Dr. Miranda Chen, attending physician, emergency medicine. Her jaw came apart. The sound she made was not a word. It was something that preceded words, something from a register below language, a mother's sound, involuntary and devastating. My father followed her stare. I watched his understanding arrive the way structural collapse arrives, not all at once, but in sequence, each support failing in turn. The version of reality he had maintained for 6 years, the one in which his elder daughter was a troubled, dishonest woman who had fabricated a medical career as part of a continuing psychotic episode, cracked straight down the middle. Miranda, my mother's voice barely existed. You're a doctor? I've been an attending for 3 years, I said. I've been practicing medicine for 10. My father made a sound. But Natalie showed us. She swore. She had documents. I know exactly what she swore, I said. And I know exactly what the documents were. We are not doing this here. I turned toward the crash cart. Your daughter's heart is failing. If Ben doesn't crack her chest in the next few minutes, she dies before sunrise. The monitor flatlined. The room exploded. Paddles. Push one of Epi. Get me a thoracotomy tray now. I moved to the bedside. Ben was already calling for the tray. Diane was at the defibrillator. The respiratory tech adjusted the vent settings, and a second nurse, Marcus, was drawing medications with the efficiency of someone who has done this in the dark. I was aware, at the periphery of my vision, of my parents pressed against the wall. I did not look at them again. I looked at my sister. 6 years. Frozen nights in a Honda Civic, timed crying sessions, plasma donations, shoes held together with gauze, a graduation hall where no one screamed from the balconies. All of it had led here, to this room, where the person who had burned my life to the ground needed my hands to keep her heart beating. I snapped on my gloves. I did not hesitate for a single second. The thoracotomy took 47 minutes. This is not the place for the clinical details. The open chest, the hands inside the pericardium, the particular intimacy of cardiac surgery that no amount of training makes feel ordinary. What I will say is that Ben Kaufman, 7 years of emergency medicine, board certified in surgical critical care, is one of the best hands I have ever worked alongside, and that we functioned that night with the precise, low verbal communication of people who have shared a trauma bay for 3 years and know each other's rhythms. Natalie's heart resumed a sustainable rhythm at 1:02 a.m. I stepped back from the table. Diane was watching me, not the clinical check of a nurse confirming a physician's status, something more human than that, a specific attention. She knew, because I had told her years ago in the particular way you tell people things at 3 a.m. in a break room during a long shift, obliquely, without naming the names. She had filed it away. You okay? She asked, quietly enough that only I could hear it. I'm fine, I said. It was true. That was the strange part. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. The work had been what the work always was. Consuming, demanding, clarifying in the way that high-stakes medicine clarifies everything. And the personal dimension of it had waited outside the door, the way personal dimensions do when you have trained yourself to make them wait. I stripped my gloves. I wrote the initial post-procedure notes. I spoke to the ICU team about transfer. I did the things I always do. Then I walked into the family waiting room, where my parents had been escorted by the social worker on call, and I sat down across from them. I want to tell you about what my father looked like in that waiting room because it matters. He is a man who has always carried himself with the particular self-possession of someone who made it through hard things on willpower and does not intend to let anyone see the cost. He wept once in my childhood at his own father's funeral, briefly and silently, and I had never seen it since. He was weeping when I walked in. Not dramatically, just sitting in a plastic chair with his hands on his knees and tears moving steadily down his face, making no sound, as though he had been doing it for some time and had stopped noticing. My mother looked up when I entered. She had the compressed, wrecked expression of someone who has been crying so hard they've run out and are now just sitting with the aftermath. She's stable, I said. She'll need additional cardiac monitoring and likely surgical repair in the next few days, but she survived the night. My mother put her face in her hands. I waited. When she looked up, she said, "Miranda, how long?" Not a question exactly, an accounting. "The text from Dad came my second year," I said. "October." I slept in my car for 11 days before I found a room I could afford. I kept my voice level, not because I wasn't feeling anything, I was feeling a significant amount, but because this conversation required level. I graduated, did my residency. I've been here for 3 years. My father looked at the floor. "We thought, I know what you thought," I said. "Natalie was very thorough. I sent you my transcripts and she told you I'd forged them. There wasn't a version of the truth that she hadn't pre-discredited." I paused. "I want you to understand that I know that. I've had years to understand that. She was good at it." My mother made a sound. "We should have—" "Yes," I said simply. "You should have. Not cruel, just accurate." My father looked at me then, really looked, in a way that had the quality of finally, of someone who has been deliberately not looking for a long time and has run out of reasons to keep not looking. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 words. Plain, without elaboration, from a man who didn't say them. I nodded. "I told them the social worker would check in shortly, that Natalie would be moved to the ICU within the hour, that they could ask the nursing staff for updates. I told them that if they had questions about her care, they should feel free to request a conversation with her primary team." Then I stood. "Miranda," my mother's voice. Will you, can we?" I stopped. I looked at her. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here if you need medical information about Natalie's care. The rest of it is going to take time that I'm not sure I have tonight." I walked back to the ER. Natalie was awake 4 days later. I had avoided her room, not deliberately, or not only deliberately, but because her care had been transferred to the cardiac surgery service and my involvement was complete, professionally, and the rest of it was not something I had decided how to approach. She asked to see me on a Thursday morning. The request came through the floor nurse, a young man named Tyler, who delivered it with the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed that the situation was complicated and was trying to honor that without knowing the details. I thought about refusing. I went. She was propped up in the cardiac ICU bed with the particular diminishment of the recently very ill, smaller than she should be, the vitality temporarily absent, the face stripped of its usual performance. She looked at me when I walked in with an expression I had not seen on her face before, which was the expression of someone who has run out of the thing they have always used. She couldn't perform anything. She was too tired. "Miranda," she said. "Natalie." I sat in the chair beside the bed. Silence. "You saved my life," she said finally. "I did my job," I said. "I destroyed yours." I looked at her. "You tried to. It didn't work." Her jaw tightened. Not anger, something else. Something that was working very hard not to be what it actually was. "I was jealous," she said. "That's not enough. I know that's not enough, but that's what it was." She looked at the window. You were always the one who was going to make it. Everyone said it. They looked at you and they just knew. And I thought she stopped. I thought if I took that away, I'd get a turn. I did not tell her I understood. I didn't think that would have been honest. "You got a lot of turns," I said. "You just wanted mine." She closed her eyes. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right. There was no explosion in that room. No confrontation I had spent 6 years imagining. Just 2 women in a cardiac ICU, one of them alive because of the other, and the particular quiet that settles when everything has already been said by the facts." I stood up. "I'm going to need time," I said. "A lot of time. I don't know if it leads anywhere. I'm not promising you it does." She nodded without opening her eyes. I left. My parents filed a police report about the fabricated documents 3 weeks after Natalie was discharged. This was their decision. I had not asked for it. My father called me on a Sunday evening, 7 p.m., the old time, which I don't think was accidental, and told me they had consulted with an attorney and were going to the police with everything they had. The fake bank statements, the fabricated letters, the transcripts they had been told were forgeries. My mother had found the originals in Natalie's email. She had forwarded herself copies, apparently for reasons my mother described as, "I don't know. Miranda, she keeps things. She always kept things." And the original fabricated documents were in a folder in Natalie's sent mail. Detective Priya Nair, 12 years with the city's financial crimes unit, took the report. She was thorough and unsentimental, which is what the situation required. She reviewed the fabricated documents, compared them to the legitimate records my parents provided, and classified the case as fraud and defamation with potential civil implications. No criminal charges were ultimately filed. Natalie's attorney negotiated an agreement in which she acknowledged the conduct, signed a formal written admission, and agreed to a civil settlement with my parents covering the costs of 6 years of the support they had withheld from me. The settlement funds went to my parents, not to me, because I had not asked for them. What I had asked for was the written admission, which my attorney Nina Carr, 8 years family and civil law, had negotiated as a non-negotiable term. The document exists, notarized, in my files. Natalie Chen, in her own words, confirming that she fabricated evidence, coordinated a campaign to sever my relationship with my family, and did so with full knowledge of the consequences. I look at it sometimes, not often. Mostly I don't need to. I am 36 years old now. I work Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday shifts in the ER at Presbyterian Memorial. James makes coffee before I leave for early shifts. I have a patient panel I know well, and a resident I've been supervising this year who reminds me of myself at that stage. Precise, slightly too serious, not yet convinced that surviving is the same as succeeding. She will figure it out. My parents and I are in the early, careful stages of something I don't yet have a name for. My father calls on Sundays at 7 p.m. My mother sent a card on my birthday, handwritten, which I kept. We are not yet the family we were before Natalie. We are not yet the family we might have been without her. But we are something, and something is more than I had at my graduation. Dr. Zhao, who I still see once a month, calls this provisional reconstruction. The word I use for it is enough for now. Natalie is recovering. She and I speak occasionally, briefly. I do not know what we are building, or whether we are building anything. I know that she sent me a birthday card this year with a single line inside, "I know sorry isn't enough. I'm going to spend the time anyway." I have not responded yet. I'm still deciding. People ask me sometimes, colleagues who know pieces of the story, the resident who asked me once after a difficult shift, whether it was hard to save her. And I want to be honest about the answer, because the easy version and the true version are different. The easy version is, she's my sister. Of course I saved her. The true version is, in that trauma bay, she wasn't my sister. She was a 30-year-old woman with a failing heart and a specific constellation of physiological problems that I was trained to address. And the history between us had no bearing on the medicine, and I did not let it. That is not coldness. That is not heroism. That is what the training produces when you do it right. That is what 10 years and a Honda Civic and 14-minute crying sessions and plasma donations and a cracked shoe and a 94th percentile score and a silent graduation hall. That is what all of it produces, eventually, when you refuse to break. She put me in the street. I put her back together, not to make a point, not to prove something, not to arrive at a moment she would have to acknowledge, because she needed a doctor, and I was one. That's the whole story. That's all of it. There's a photo on my office wall. Me, white coat, stethoscope, badge. My husband took it on the day I made attending. I'm alone in it. I always thought I'd replace it when I had something better. I haven't replaced it. I look at it sometimes when shifts go long and the work gets heavy and I need to remember what it cost to get here. It cost everything, and it was worth it. Every single frozen 14-minute plasma sold, electrical tape shoe, silent graduation minute of it. Worth it.